Howdy, Possum Patty here, and I hope all the dads and granddads and stepdads out there had a wonderful Father's Day. Yes, we had a little picnic, and everyone's gone home now, and I'm sitting back relaxing. Well, I started thinking about my father. Of course, he's long past, and I got out some old black and white photos, and I'm looking through them. I don't have too many. No, I think my sister has some more, though. And then I started thinking about the book. Now, a friend of my father's wrote a book mostly about my grandfather, but because he was a friend of my father's, yes, my father's plays a part in the book. A lot of the chapters, believe me. I'm even in it too, yes. But yeah, I started reading the stories in the book, because it's Father's Day. And I started reading one about Old Joe. Now, I'll tell you about Old Joe in a little while. But that reminded me that when I was in college studying to become a teacher, in our children's literature course, now we called it Kitty Lit. So one of the assignments in Kitty Lit was to write our own story and make a little book. Years ago, right? I still have it. It's right here. And I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, I wonder if I should take this and maybe rework it a little bit and turn it into a little storybook and, maybe for the kids in the family or something. So all this stuff is on the table. Originally, I'm like, okay, I'll eventually get to make a journal page. But I want to share these other things with you first. So come on along. A little disclaimer before I read this story. Yes, Bernie wrote this story probably when he was in the 80s, and a lot of the story took place 50, 60 years before he wrote it. And I know some of these stories, there's a truth to them, there's an element of truth to them. Some of the facts are just plain wrong, though. But he wrote it in a very folksy style, and I think he really believed that this is the way everything happened. I was there, and I'm like, no, but it is super fun to read. And again, just a little warning here about the folksy language. Yes, not always PC, so just a little forewarning there. So this is a chapter from the book, which is called, I think, An American Gothic. It's got a really long title. It's called American Gothic, an Anthology, Tales by and of Her Native Sons, Whose Molds Were Broken and Whose Time Has Fled, and in America Before Political Correctness. Just to give you an idea what it's about, okay? So in this story, my father is Charles, but they call him Chuck. My mother is Margaret. They call him Maggie. And I'm just one of the kids. Old Joe. Chuck and his family were really the only thing approaching real-life gypsies, I guess, that ever lived in Fairfield County. Theirs was an itinerant lifestyle for sure, for they were always on the move in one of Chuck's old cars or trucks. Chuck was the squatter from hell for these hapless landlords and never seemed to have this month's rent, with the result that life for them was just one long series of evictions and moves. I could count on these as regular as rain. The phone would ring and I would answer. I knew it was Chuck, of course, because on the other end would be only silence. Chuck's idea was that when you called someone, it was up to them to start a conversation, interlaced with questions, to which he would supply grudgingly and monosyllabic replies. The conversation would go like this. Me first. Moving tomorrow, right? Need help? Yep. What time? Real early. Be there. Bzz. This from Chuck's hung up set. They were on the cutting edge of communications, those Rhines, light years ahead of the rest of us. No salutation, no greetings, no hellos, no goodbyes, no foreplay either, I suppose. A little less talk and a lot more action. Let's cut to the main attraction, as the rockabilly lyric has it. But I wander. Man, what a bunch. Next morning, bright and early, there I would be, ready for a day of yo heave ho and getting Chuck's plunder jacked up and on wheels again. Like as not, one or two other early morning editors from the gang would be there too, perhaps yet green to Rhineland. So it's Saturday, someone would growl. Why the hell do we have to do this anyway? Part of the deal, I would tender. This was a favorite coverall for everything, father and son. Got to get your ducks in a row, get everything working. This added rather malevolently to these pilgrims. They would grumble and shift, then wait patiently for their lot. To tell the truth, I was regarded as one of the family, and it was best not to cross any of the Rhines. Strange lot, you know. We would invade the house. Like as not, Chuck would still be asleep with his shoes on, and Maggie would be feeding dogs and kids democratically from the same fry pan. Nothing would have been packed or done, despite yesterday's blandishments, that all would be ready to move out of the house upon our arrival. But move it we did. More than once, I remember grabbing each a corner of the kitchen tablecloth as all was lifted in unison, and fried eggs, jam pot, stockings being darned, silverware, loose change, and a can of dog food or two were all tied into a neat bundle and slung aboard the waiting truck. Chuck would be turned out of bed, shoes and all, and in a trice the bed follows the morning's breakfast into the cavernous truck. Clothes hangers closed, newspapers read and unread, neckties tied and untied, watermelons in season. My 22, leave that gun out, Mike, it's mine. Kids, washed and unwashed, crying, silent, whatever. In an hour or two, the digs would be swept clean. At this juncture, a cry usually went up. Tell Bernie to get old Joe. I don't know why I was always assigned this detail. Maybe it's because life has just been one big goose chase for me anyhow. Maybe I was unusually nimble in those far-off times. Maybe because I once owned geese myself, having the rare distinction of having helped a vet sew up one of my geese on an operating table one bitter winter night, while simultaneously sprinkling water on my unconscious wife at my feet. But that's another tale. Old Joe was Chuck's pet goose, and he could sense an upcoming move a week beforehand. And when the time came, old Joe would have the wind up well before us movers. And then it was up, up and away and around the house and grounds to run old Joe down. He knew every trick, old Joe, and he could half fly, half sail, and half squirm, and whole peck, bam, right on the shins with the best of them. But I always got my man, or my goose. Thus, at last, we would set off for the new quarters, bag and baggage, goose and kids piled high, kind of like the Route 66 Okies of my youth. A typical move was the time we moved into the Watmore's gatehouse. It sat some removed from the main road and well off the main drive, even up at the end of its own little winding dirt road. When we were still a quarter mile from the house, old Joe, the world's most prescient goose, must have known what lay ahead, for with a sudden loud squawk and a whirl of feathers, he flew straight up out of the truck bed and landed, running, in the woods alongside the road. In no time he was lost to sight, but we could hear his loud honks as he announced his arrival to the neighborhood. He was a goose for all seasons, old Joe, and no fox or other predator ever chewed on his bones. Just who did chew on them, I will shortly reveal. But for now, we must get the family settled in. Well, the next part of the story is really funny. It talks about our move into the house and how my father got the brilliant idea to buy hundreds of baby turkeys and raise them, counted everybody in on the deal, and then he was going to sell them in the fall for Thanksgiving. Now, hundreds of these baby turkeys were all in the kitchen. And my father's playing the guitar, and his friend Bernie, who wrote the story, is playing the guitar, and they're singing songs. And I guess apparently the dog. Now, the dog's name was Maggie, and my mom's name was Maggie. I think there's a chapter about that in the book, too. Yeah. Anyway, I guess apparently the dog Maggie, ate the baby turkey. I guess that was supposed to be our Thanksgiving dinner. So I'll skip over that part for right now and just move ahead in time. As to the turkey business, well, I'm afraid that proved a bust after all. The rains of that unwholesome spring took their toll. The survivors lived on long enough into the summer to eat up several $100s worth of feed and fill an abandoned shed or two on the estate with droppings. But that was about it. Came Turkey Day, other arrangements had to be made. This led, incidentally, to a most unfortunate turn of events for old Joe. For old Joe got hisself eaten, he did, and by his erstwhile master. Seemed Chuck was flat broke as usual, and his creditors were hanging on him more numerous than ticks on a hound's ear, just as Thanksgiving arrived. Stung by Maggie, the wife's, importunings regarding a bird for dinner, that eventful day, recall Maggie the dog had eaten her turkey dinner early on, Chuck cut to the chase, as might be appropriate for the circumstances. The following Monday, he told me, we were at our desk. I idly asked over my shoulder how he and his family had fared for Thanksgiving. Fine, came the answer. Lots of turkey, I asked, though turkey was sort of a code word with us by then. Anyhow, his reply came back. No, goose. I picked up my ears. Goose, I said. Yup, he replied. Ate old Joe. You ate old Joe? I asked, somewhat taken aback. Lord God, Bernie. Sometimes Chuck prefaced emotion-laden subjects with this line. I had to do something. Details followed. Seemed he'd trussed old Joe up by the legs, hung him over a branch, and decapitated him with head shears. Snip, snip, just like that. Then old Joe is laid away in the baking pan with taters round and round, as the old song has it, and roasted to a golden brown. Was he good? I wondered. Lord God, Bernie, I thought so. We ate him all. What about Maggie and the kids? I asked. Lord God, Bernie, they cried and cried the whole time. I couldn't understand it, but they ate him just the same. Rest in peace. Well, that's the story of old Joe. Yes, I believe some of it happened like this. I thought we got old Joe when we got to the Watmore estate, but I was pretty young at the time, so I don't remember all of this, just some of it. I remember hundreds of baby turkeys. Yes, they were in the kitchen. I remember all that, and they got bigger and they got moved out to the shed, although I believe we still had a bunch left that went to the slaughterhouse in the fall, but that's another story. And at the end, yeah. Now, I remember that Joe had two wives, two female geese, and that a fox came and ran them all off. But like the story said, the fox never chewed on his bones because old Joe did come back after the fox ran him off. Got the two wives, but not old Joe. And I do remember after that happened, yes, my father did trussed them up, and my mom did cook them, and I remember us sitting there. I remember crying, and not being able to eat the goose. That's what I remember. Anyway, before this book was even written, I had remembered that story. And like I was telling you, yes, we had to make a little book. Now this is so old it's falling apart. And I don't know what kind of paper I used, but the paper is getting all unglued and discolored, but that's okay. Oh, 1982 I wrote this, so that's quite a while ago. And this is how I wrote the story for children. A goose named Old Joe lived with his 2 wives in a pond near a red brick house that sat in a valley. Early every morning, the man from the house would come to the pond and bring breadcrumbs and yellow cracked corn. The pond was a quiet place to live, with only an occasional visitor stopping in. One day, while Joe was enjoying his morning meal, he was popped into a wooden crate along with his wives. After a short ride up one of the mountainsides, Joe and his wives arrived at a small farm, which was to be their new home. Old Joe set out to explore the barnyard. He met Snowball, the farm cat, basking in the warm sun. He quickly learned that she did not like to be disturbed. Next, he met Maggie, the farm dog. Maggie did not stop to talk to Joe, for she was on her way to chase the rabbits out of the garden. And then Old Joe met Patsy. She had been waiting for Joe with a large scoop of yellow cracked corn. Old Joe liked Patsy. He could always be found following right behind her, and right behind Joe would be his 2 wives. Late one night, a fox crept into the barnyard. He startled the sleeping geese, who ran honking off into the woods. Patsy sadly waited for the geese to return. Days later, Joe found his way out of the woods. He was very hungry and raggedy and alone. Patsy's father built a fox-proof pen for Old Joe. Joe was happy again, for every day Patsy came to visit him and brought yellow cracked corn. Not how the story ended. I made this up. I told the teacher too. I said, well, I didn't write the real ending of the story. I said, this really happened, but I said he ended up on the dinner plate. So I didn't think that was a good ending for a children's book. Okay, now what's next? Okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking about doing this over and turning this into a book, but I'm going to have to rework these pages and make this book over because it's falling apart. And maybe I'll draw some more pages, add some more illustrations maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about starting my book writing career with this. Okay, so what am I going to do for a journal page? My original idea was to use this television and this retro paper. I know it's kind of 80-ish, but this is an old TV, and tell a story about how we used to take the bulbs out of the back of the TV and go to the Rexall drugstore and test them and replace them. But that's another story. But now I'm thinking I want to do the Old Joe story. So, yes, I have to gather up my thoughts, and I'm thinking about maybe I'll just photocopy some of these pages or one of these pages, and yes, and put it in my journal and just write a brief note about my father, a little memory about my father and the goose. I got my spring journal out. Yes, there will be a journal page. I'll get all my things together and come back for part 2. I'm probably going to photocopy all the pages in this book before it falls apart. And maybe I'll use some of those images on the journal page. I'm thinking about popping in a picture of dear old dad on the journal page. Just something special for Father's Day. Yeah, there's a lot here on the table. I have my possum journaling to do, and I have my Tea Tuesday journaling to do. I'm so lucky to have a pile of wonderful things to do every day. Well, let me know if you enjoyed that little story. Yeah, just tell me down in the comments below. Cause yeah, there's a lot more in this book. There's a lot more in here about dear old dad. Quite the colorful character. I'm so lucky to have this story that Bertie wrote about my dad and my granddad. And it's funny all the way through. You will not believe the adventures in this book. Most of which is true. Most of which is true. Some facts I know he got wrong, but most of it is kind of true. Funny to read anyway. Well, thank you for indulging me today and just letting me read and reminisce and think about a journal page. And yeah, I'll get on it tomorrow. Happy junk journaling. Bye bye.